When I was first appointed as the executive director, I was young and I don't think anybody thought I was the right person for the job. So there was a lot of, why did they hire her? But I had a right-hand man, his name was Patrick Reese, and he would sit with me every morning and he'd kind of help me go through what we had to do during the day and kind of have a plan for action. He'd been working 38 years. He could have done my job in his sleep. But rather than sort of crabbing at me about why did they hire her, he would always say to me, he'd help me think it through, and I'd say, Patrick, what do you think we should do? And he would say, my solution to your problem will always be wrong. What do you think you should do? And so I put that as one of the 12 principles in the book because it's so true. It doesn't matter that we're educated and that we have experience in all of these things. The solution to the problem that is facing Joanna is inside Joanna. And what I can do is to help excavate by asking questions to find out more information. And I'll help you, by doing that, recognize what the answer is. But my solution to your problem is always going to be wrong. But you have the solution inside you. And Patrick taught me that.
This is Associations Thrive, the podcast celebrating successful associations and their leaders. I'm your host, Joanna Pineda, CEO and Chief Troublemaker at Matrix Group International. Listen in as top association executives tell all, revealing the creative and innovative ways they're increasing membership, generating revenue, nurturing engagement, and reimagining their organizations. By the way, if you've launched a new initiative, created new member services, or updated your governance structure and are seeing great results, I want to hear your story, and so do my listeners. I'd love to have you as a guest. Go to podcast.matrixgroup.net and apply to be on Associations Thrive. Now let's dive into this week's show. Today, I'm speaking with Sharon Eubank. She is Executive Director of the Humanitarian Services of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. Sharon, welcome to the show.
Thank you so much, Joanna. I'm really happy to be here.
Sharon, tell us about humanitarian services.
Probably most people know that the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints is a global Christian faith. It has about 18 million members in 175 countries. But it has a humanitarian mission, and that mission is to give concrete evidence of the two great commandments. In other words, that we love God and we love our neighbor, and that we practice the gospel of the Good Samaritan that is found in the New Testament with Jesus Christ. And we should do those things in a way that is regardless of people's faith or politics or geography or orientation or background or tribe, whatever. The great commandment is to love. And so for us, not so that other people will be Christians, but because we are Christians, we have this outward-facing mission that we want to do. And so a lot of that comes along through caring for people in their communities if there's a disaster or if there's long-term development aid that needs to happen. And being a global church that has members in 30,000 congregations all around the world, it's nice that people can work in their own settings, that you're not sending Americans abroad so much as empowering people where they live. So that's sort of the main idea about what it is we're doing and why.
Sharon, give us examples of the work that you do. What areas do you work in? So give us an example of a project maybe overseas or even in this country.
I'm going to answer that in kind of a funny way because in 1868 in Salt Lake City, where I live, the infant mortality rate was sky high. And, they didn't know about the origin of germs and hand washing and public health. There was none of that. But the women's organization of the church said, our idea is to send women back east to go to medical school, and we're going to get some doctors to come back here. And I just promise, nobody in 1868 thought that women belonged in medical school. But, they went door to door, they collected money for their tuition, and then they sent these women to medical school. And one of them was a woman named Martha Hughes Cannon. When she came back after 5 years in Chicago, she wanted to do a bill for public health. And, the territory was like, no, we have other priorities. We're not going to do that. She couldn't get the legislature to pay attention. So she ran for the legislature. She ran as a Democrat. She ran against her husband, who was the Republican, and she won.
Wow.
And the first goal was to introduce public health. And so because of her, if I go down and get a vaccine right now, I go to the Martha Hughes Cannon Health Center. She was the first female state senator in the United States. I say all of that because that background really helped us as we go into other communities whose public health isn't as strong, or it's difficult for children to get the vaccinations that they need, or the supportive food that they need for their brain development before they're 5, or the clean water so that they don't die of diarrheal diseases. That background isn't just something that's academic to us. It's really practical because our community lived that. And we're eager to be supportive and helpful for other people. So our great global priority is the well-being of children under 5. So it means that they and their mother survive the birth. They get their routine vaccinations, and not just a special effort, but that there's a place that they regularly can go and get follow-up care. They drink clean water. They get enough protein and vegetables in their diet before they're 5 so that their brains develop, and they enter primary school. That little scenario is so complex. And, people make choices for various reasons, but our global priority is to address that. And of course, we do disaster relief and we do lots of other kinds of things, but that's our global priority that we're working on in every place in the world.
So Sharon, if that's your global priority, I guess depending on where you are in the world, what you end up focusing on will be different because of the conditions of the local area.
I'll give a really easy example. Children, when they're developing, they need eye interaction. They need to look in the face of their parents and their caregivers and have that. Lots of times people don't get that. And in some countries, it's because my baby is strapped to my back while I'm, gardening and working in the fields all day, and all they see is the pattern of my dress on the backside. But in other places, say the United States, there's always a phone in between me and my baby. I'm constantly looking at this black square and they're not interacting with my face. The reasons are different, or the interactions are different, but the effect is the same. Kids aren't getting enough face-to-face time with their parents and caregivers. So the way that we approach those things is different by location, but the idea is the same.
Every time I turn on the news, open up my local paper or a national paper, there's some kind of a disaster or some kind of a great need in this country and around the world. What kind of a year are you having?
Everybody who's working in this sector feels that disasters are intensifying and speeding up. So in some years, we might respond to 1 or 2 100-year disasters. And last year, we responded to 7 of them. And everybody is feeling the stress of that. And it's being driven by the contrasts in the weather are more extreme. So if it's dry, it's really dry. If it's wet, it's very wet. So you get many more high-intensity hurricanes or droughts. There's a lot of conflict going on in the world right now, and exacerbated with drought, it means people leave their homes and they go somewhere else. And that has a lot of ramifications around all of that. So those are the kinds of things that we're responding to. But I'm proud of our organization. We're a medium-sized organization. We're not the biggest, but we're not the smallest. But last year, we had about 3,800 projects. We spent about $1.45 billion. And I'm happiest of all, there were 6.6 million volunteer hours of people working in their communities in those projects, and we worked in 192 countries. So that's a lot of work going on and a lot of people engaged in that work. And although the world is difficult, we're also making progress. We just don't talk about that as much.
Yeah. Well, we got a lot to talk about, but let's turn to your journey. So how'd you get to become Executive Director of Humanitarian Services?
Sometimes students call my office and they say, I want to follow your career path. What did you do? And I say, mine was like a pinball machine. I didn't even study the things that I should have to have this degree.
Everyone says that, Sharon.
Do they?
There is no playbook.
And maybe that's good for us, that we don't follow just a straight linear path. I can probably think of about 5 vignettes that taught me something critical so that I'm able to do my job right now. I studied English as a second language at university. That was my degree. And so my first job was in Japan. And I have a really vivid memory of, I was mostly teaching Honda executives, but I had a little class of 9-year-old girls, and they were just learning colors, numbers, it was a very basic class. And I asked one of the girls who's 9, I said, Sachiko, what's your favorite color? And I'm enunciating, what's your favorite color? And she turns to the group and they have a little confab in Japanese about what would be the group's favorite color.
Oh, interesting.
I said, Sachiko, not the group. I said, what is your favorite color? And she could not understand why I would be so rude as to put her preference above everybody else's. And I started to really drill into that. And then I realized, hold on, she's teaching me something really important, that when you're in a member of a group, you can come to consensus on a group decision that is not elevating one person's opinion. I took that lesson away from Japan, and it has served me so well all my life.
Wow. So how long have you been in this position?
I've been the executive director since 2011, so I'm coming up on 15 years. I worked for Humanitarian Services for about 28 years.
And how many people work for you?
I have about 40 people that work in our offices here, and then we have 24 regional offices, and they each have staff there.
Well, let's turn to humanitarian services. Like I said earlier, it feels like a time of increasing disasters and natural disasters and man-made disasters. People see the need and they don't know what to do. You're someone who has to make decisions every day about what you're going to respond to. So how do you do that as an organization? How do you decide what disaster you're going to respond to and in which countries and which place?
One of the things that I've learned over time, I'll talk about two things. One of them is you don't know the answers to that. My staff sitting in Salt Lake City, we don't know the answers to that question. Even the regional offices, you have to sit down with the people who are living the disaster and ask them a series of questions. And then you can respond depending on what they have answered. And one of those questions is, what do you want? What do you have already? And what are the gaps that you have that you want help filling in? But if we come up with these cookie-cutter approaches and we try to apply those in different situations, we will always make mistakes. So one of the things that I always try to tell students or people who ask me is local solutions for local problems. And that's just inevitable. And it will be slightly different in every single location, but I think that's one of them. Another one is that we're most powerful where we live. After the Southeast Asia tsunami that hit Thailand and India and Sri Lanka, and I was in Sri Lanka 5 months after it happened. And my job was to help fishermen get their boats back and seamstresses get their equipment back because everything had been destroyed in the wave. It was a 30-foot wave. It came 2 miles inland and it just ground up and destroyed everything.
Right.
And 5 months later, I was traveling in a van with a local logistics guy. His name was Shanta. And he said, I want to show you something. So we stopped. And up on the tracks was the daily train, big, heavy metal commuter train. And when the people around there heard the siren about the wave, they handed up their little children up into the windows of the train because they thought it's high on the track and it's a big, heavy train and that will protect them. And when the wave hit, it just slammed into the train and tumbled it. And 1,500 people in the train died. So it was just such a sad disaster. Well, 5 months later, all these families are still camped around the train because it was the last place they were with their family. And as we got out, Shanta and I, people would touch my skin and they would say a couple words that they know. I lost my baby. I lost my husband. Help me, please help me. And I couldn't say to them, just over the rise, we're building 900 houses, for people that have lost their housing, or I didn't have anything in my pocket. I didn't have any way of expressing myself. But I watched Shanta. He goes over to the van. He gets out a little soccer ball and he pumps it up and he starts kicking around with the kids in the dirt and they start laughing and kind of showing off their skills and competing. And while he's doing that, a woman comes out and said, hey, that yeast that you showed me worked. You should see my bread. It's looking great. And another woman said, I can't get any washing powder. Can you help me? And he said, I'll look for some. But I had this dawning realization. Shanta is more powerful in this situation than I am because he lives there, because he speaks the language, because he understands the culture, and he's there all the time. Where, I'm coming in and out, and I don't have those abilities. And it was the first time in my long career that I realized we are much more powerful where we live. And we think we have to have a big fund or we have to travel far away, and we envision ourselves giving things away. The most powerful thing we can do is work where we live because we understand all of those things. And that's one of the missing elements, I think. So often we think we have to go somewhere. And the thing that I think our communities are waiting for is for us to engage.
Sharon, that's very powerful. You're saying, look around, see what the need is in your community, and probably start there first. You've just written a book. It's called Doing Small Things with Great Love. Talk to us about the book and why you wrote it.
Maybe the most common question that I get, people ask me this every single day, is what can I do to help? There's such a desire in us. We see things on the news or we're aware of things, and there's a great empathy and desire to do something to help. But the way we help is really critical. So the publisher, Shadow Mountain Publishing, they came to me and they said, would you write a book about the mistakes that have been made and ways that we could address that? And so one of the things that I address in the book, and it's shocking, is when we see something on the news, we reply. And what we mostly do is we'll gather things that we assume that they'll need, and then we try to ship those things to the location. But I tell a series of stories in the book about, in the humanitarian sector, they call it the second disaster, because once that disaster happens, stuff starts arriving and it starts getting dumped off onto runways or in warehouses or, just piled up in different places. It isn't what people asked for. It's just what people thought that they would need. And sometimes it's hilarious. I remember in Hurricane Mitch in 1998, on that runway, there were bales and bales of winter coats. It's the middle of summer in Honduras, and it was clogging up the runway. Planes couldn't land because that stuff was sitting there. In the Southeast Asia tsunami, people sent so much stuff, and there wasn't time to go through it and sort it and figure out what to do. And so it just sat there on the beach. And after a while, it was just rotting in the sun, and they didn't have any other choice. They poured gasoline all over, and they burned it. And it's so sad to feel those stories because people were trying to help out of their empathy, but it was the wrong thing at the wrong time. And to me, that's one of the greatest lessons that we could learn. Ask them what they want and how is it going to get distributed and who's going to do that work, and then respond in those ways rather than assuming and going to all that effort to send something when it's the wrong thing.
So I hear about a typhoon in the Philippines, and I think, wow, I've got to do something. How do I ask that question? What do you need, and how do I get it to you? Because I'm an individual. What do I do?
This is another difficult thing, and I'm just going to tell you what I know from my own experience.
Yeah.
We have to work with the organizations that are on the ground there.
Okay.
And if you ask them, they will say money is the most flexible thing for us.
Okay.
Because what we need this week will be different than next week. And, they can pivot really carefully. We don't like to give money because it can be siphoned off in corruption. You don't ever know what will happen. We need to do a good job vetting the organizations about whom we give it to. And you can flood locations with too much money. But if you want to help, find somebody who's working on the ground that has a good reputation and ask them what it is they want and then respond to that. It's not the ideal answer, but it's the best answer after 28 years of doing it.
I mean, I understand this. I was a fundraiser, my first job out of college, Sharon, and we were raising money for the San Francisco Public Schools. And the best thing people could give was money, because then we could give the teachers money that they could then use to purchase what they needed in their classrooms. And every teacher needed something different.
Yeah.
The science teacher versus the teacher who wanted to, pay for a bus ride versus the other teacher who needed whatever for the math class.
I would say, though, Joanna, money is only half the answer, because the way that money is effective is when it percolates through a protective network on the ground. And this can be, you'll know this because you were raising money for schools. It can be the PTSA, it can be your HOA, it can be the city council, it can be an NGO, a local organization on the ground. But that organization has to hold itself accountable so that there isn't corruption in it, and they've worked together a long time and they know what works. The money won't solve the problem on its own. We've invested $2 trillion into problems in Africa, and in some ways we've made it worse. The money is effective when it goes through this local trusted network who's right there on the ground. They know everybody and they know what to do. And sometimes faiths are those people, because we know where everybody lives and we know who's done what. And we have long-term relationships among the faiths in the community. And sometimes those are the most trusted networks. But you want to find a trusted network and you want to ask them, how are you going to protect the integrity of the money for me as a donor? And how will you let me know what happened with my money?
Sharon, why did you decide to write a book? And should other organizations write a book too?
I don't know if they should write a book, but Because some of these things that you and I have been talking about have been so unintuitive for people, I think we tell stories on the news sometimes, and we don't tell these ugly sides to things that, they had to burn the pile or, it wasn't really useful. I wanted to write this book so that some of those real principles could be out there so that people could engage with them and have a chance to just say, let's just tell it like it is. This is what I've seen after almost 30 years of doing the work.
Well, you've got 12 principles in the book. Maybe share some stories from one of the principles.
One of my favorite stories, when I was first appointed as the executive director, I was young and I don't think anybody thought I was the right person for the job. So there was a lot of, why did they hire her? But I had a right-hand man, his name was Patrick Reese, and he would sit with me every morning and he'd kind of help me go through what we had to do during the day and kind of have a plan for action. He'd been working 38 years. He could have done my job in his sleep. But rather than sort of crabbing at me about why did they hire her, he would always say to me, he'd help me think it through, and I'd say, Patrick, what do you think we should do? And he would say, my solution to your problem will always be wrong. What do you think you should do? And so I put that as one of the 12 principles in the book because it's so true. It doesn't matter that we're educated and that we have experience in all of these things. The solution to the problem that is facing Joanna is inside Joanna. And what I can do is to help excavate by asking questions to find out more information. And I'll help you by doing that recognize what the answer is. But my solution to your problem is always going to be wrong. But you have the solution inside you. And Patrick taught me that.
Boy, what an amazing leadership lesson for your staff. Do you use that with them too?
I try to use it all the time. To just say, trust yourself, have confidence. I'll ask you a bunch of questions. We can decide what you want to do, but it's in you. I don't have the outside answer to what you need.
And especially if they're sort of the subject matter expert about something, they might be coming to you for advice, but maybe with some guidance, you can help them find the answer themselves because they have the knowledge.
And Patrick gave me confidence in a situation where I wasn't very confident to be able to trust myself and say, okay. And I think in any situation, if you're going to give something, give confidence, give trust.
Well, Sharon, in the back of the book, you talk about things that people can do to be engaged in their communities. So maybe share a couple of thoughts from the back of the book.
It's always so hard to get started. And so in the back of the book, I wrote 50 things that you can just do, anywhere to try and get started. And a couple of them are just kind of fun. Give a book to somebody and tell them why you chose that book for them and just have a discussion about that. But if you are looking for a way to get started to kind of understand the issues in your community, I think one of the best recommendations I can make is go to your school, your local primary school or your junior high, sit down with the principal, make an appointment and say, look, I live in the school district. I really care about the school. What issues are you facing? And what could I do as a community member to help? What do you need? What do you wish the community would do that they're not doing now? And then go do the same thing with the mayor or the city council and just say, this is my community. I love it. I want to be active. Talk to me about what you're worried about. And once you have asked those questions, you'll walk out of there with an idea of something you want to do. It'll be different for everybody. Everybody's community is different. But if you just start with the school and the mayor, you'll get somewhere.
Sharon, you've written this book. We'll put a link in the show notes so people can buy it. It sounds like an amazing read. How are you going to promote the book and get it out there? Because I'm sure some of my listeners are saying, ooh, this sounds great. But how is Humanitarian Services as an organization going to get the word out?
I'm really grateful that you invited me on the podcast, and I'll keep talking about it as long as somebody will invite me. But one of the most powerful things I think is book clubs. If you want to have a book club and you want to talk about these issues in your local neighborhood, I'll really encourage you. And I'll send a book to the book club leader, and I'll even join the book club at the end, to talk about questions that you have by Zoom or, whatever. But I'm happy to do that because the book isn't as important as the principles. For us to interact with these principles and do it in a conversational way with each other is the most powerful thing that we can do. Everybody can live this kind of a humanitarian life. You don't need an organization. You don't need a fund. You can dispense this kind of humanitarian caring just as you live your life every single day. And I will talk about that till the end of the earth.
Sharon, you've just given me a great idea because my book club is actually, we're picking out our books. But also, we've also talked about how at the end of each book club, each of us should kind of make a case for a local charity or a something that we could either give money to or be involved in.
Love that.
Oh, what a great idea. Sharon, it's September 2025. What's the rest of the year going to look like for you?
Well, I think we're in the middle of hurricane and fire season. So for us, this will be a very, very busy year. I'm eager to continue to talk about the book. If you invite me to your book club, I'd love to come. I'd love to hear what you all say about that.
Man, I'm taking you up on that too.
Good. I'd love to come.
One final question before we go. You're clearly very devoted to this work. You've got a lot of resources that you're able to deploy in all these different communities. How do you know you're making a difference?
We spend a lot of our effort and time evaluating. We do a thing called, it's a terrible acronym, but it's monitoring, evaluating, accountability, and learning. But the most important part about that is the learning. So today I had a meeting about, we're doing a big women and child's initiative in 12 countries, but we've just come back from the Philippines. So we were just going back and saying, this is year 2 out of 5 years. What have we learned that we'll implement for year 3? And I'll spend a lot of the time, the last part of the year, doing that. But in the very same way that I spend a lot of time assessing things and how are things going, I think we can do that on an individual basis. If you and I just sat down and said, hey, we talked about this subject 3 weeks ago. What have you thought about since? What have you done? In a lot of ways, you are providing that learning as part of the podcast as people go through their backgrounds and learnings from the ways that they thrive. Thank you for promoting the ways that we thrive. I think that's the same idea. It's just in different words.
Sharon, this has been an amazing interview. You'll have to come back. Maybe next year, tell us about the impact that the book has had and tell us about all the work that you're doing around the world. Thank you.
Thank you. I told 92 stories in the book, other people's stories, and so I hope I'll get 92 more. I'd love to keep talking.
Thanks for listening to Associations Thrive. We're so glad to have you here. You know, my personal mission and the mission of my company, Matrix Group International, is to help associations and nonprofits increase membership, generate revenue, and thrive in the digital space. I want to hear stories of how your organization is thriving in today's challenging landscape. Please apply to be on my show by going to podcast.matrixgroup.net. By the way, do you need help with a digital initiative? Maybe it's a website redesign, a new membership database, or a hybrid meeting that you're planning. I'd love to connect with you. Please visit the Matrix Group website at matrixgroup.net. Thanks again for listening to this week's episode of Associations Thrive. Don't forget to subscribe to the show, leave a 5-star rating, post a comment, and share it with your colleagues and friends.